clean underwear, not doing your homework, taking a nap. These insane last-minute decisions irrevocably changed the course of mankind. MLK, I have a dream. It's the most famous speech of the 20th century, possibly of all time. And the most powerful part of it, the one that everybody remembers, was completely improvised.
One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
The night before the speech, on Tuesday, August 27, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and 6 other individuals gathered together at the Willard Hotel to discuss what remarks Dr. King would be giving the next day at the Lincoln Memorial. Each member represented a different group, and each group had its own concerns and troubles that they wanted represented in King's speech. The task to summarize and pull together all these points of view fell to the speechwriter Clarence B. Jones, who spent the night outlining notes for what would become King's speech. The next morning, the speech was finalized and forwarded to the media. Later in the day, King took to the podium and began to read the prepared speech. You can clearly see King stop and read from his prepared speech during the first half.
But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free.
However, as King approached the 7th paragraph, he paused. At that moment, gospel singer and friend of King, Mahalia Jackson, shouted out, "Tell him about the dream." While her voice was never picked up by any of the microphones recording the speech, those around King heard her, including the great man himself. Pushing his papers out of the way, King improvised the most iconic speech ever recorded live. Dr. King's speech helped save many minority Americans' lives, but this next speech literally saved the life of the man who delivered it and changed the course of American history. Teddy Roosevelt's speech makes him bulletproof. "I do not care a rap for being shot, not a rap." So recounted America's most badass president as he proceeded to deliver a 53-minute speech after being shot in the chest. Just before this, Roosevelt entered his car outside the Gilpatrick Hotel and stood up to wave to the throng of supporters around him. Suddenly, from only 5 feet away, a would-be assassin fired a revolver, the bullet striking Roosevelt in the right breast. The crowd instantly fell upon the shooter in a frenzy, but above the raging din, Roosevelt's voice roared out like a mighty lion. "Do not hurt him. Bring him here. I want to see him." Incredibly, Roosevelt stopped the crowd from exacting vigilante justice on the man who had just tried to murder him. Even more incredibly, as his doctor ordered the driver to head straight for the hospital, Roosevelt said instead, "You get me to that speech." Roosevelt coughed 3 times in his hand, and not seeing blood, decided that the bullet hadn't penetrated his lung. Sticking a hand inside his jacket, he discovered a dime-sized hole from the slug on his chest. Paying it no mind, Roosevelt headed to his campaign event, where he went on to quip, "I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot." Roosevelt then opened his jacket and showed the audience his bullet wound, remarking, "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose." He then promised to keep his speech short as a consequence, but delivered a 53-minute tirade anyway. What saved Roosevelt's life? The last-minute decision to stick his 50-page speech folded up inside his jacket pocket. Had Roosevelt chosen another pocket, the bullet would have easily penetrated his glasses case and entered his body with significantly more force. As it was, the bullet remained lodged in his ribs in an upward trajectory toward the heart. The dense speech saved Roosevelt's life and changed American history. Having served 2 terms as president, Roosevelt ran a 3rd time as an independent progressive because of how weak he perceived his Republican successor, William Howard Taft, to be. As a result of him running, Woodrow Wilson easily won the election as a Democrat, and who led America through World War I and developed a 14-points plan which set the stage for post-war Europe. One last-minute decision for clean underwear, though, would lead to the most tragic loss in music history. Clean laundry kills 3 rock legends. It was called The Day the Music Died, and at 1 a.m. on February 3, 1959, a plane crash killed Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. Richardson Jr., aka the Big Bopper. The repercussions would shape rock history. Buddy Holly and his famous tour mates were on the 11th straight day of their winter dance party tour. The entire crew was exhausted, having spent every night performing to packed shows full of teenage kids and college-age crowds. All that awaited them, though, was more time spent on a cramped tour bus, where the famous musicians struggled to catch some Z's. Even worse, their clean laundry had officially run out, and the last thing Holly wanted was to perform in dirty clothes. The next stop was Fargo, North Dakota, and Holly had enough of the bus. He scraped together some cash and hired charter pilot Roger Peterson to fly them to Fargo ahead of the bus. That way they could have time to do laundry and catch up on some much-needed rest. Originally, it was just supposed to be Buddy and his band, but at the last minute, Richardson came down with a cold. Bass player Waylon Jennings agreed to give the Big Bopper his seat so the singer could have some time to rest before the next show. Ritchie Valens wanted to fly instead of ride the bus, but there was no more room, so instead he flipped a coin versus guitarist Tommy Allsup, winning the flip and the seat on the doomed plane. Despite having worked 17 hours that day, pilot Roger Peterson had agreed to fly the musicians regardless, starstruck by Buddy Holly. As he prepared for takeoff, the wind howled and snow began to fall, but at 12:30 a.m. Peterson was given the green light to take off. The control tower failed to notify Peterson of a blizzard descending upon them. The plane pulled up into the sky, and then something happened. Investigators never discovered the truth of what happened that fateful evening, but some believe that Peterson got disoriented by the heavy blizzard and flew his plane downwards instead of up. The plane plowed into a cornfield just a few minutes after takeoff at over 170 miles per hour, hurling the 4 passengers out of the wreckage. None survived, all died on impact. The fateful decision to charter that plane changed rock history forever. Holly was at the very start of his career, and despite languid sales, his records had begun to pick up popularity. With the possibility of overseas tours, Holly would have exploded into a rock sensation. After his death, Britain bought Holly's albums faster than the new ones could be printed. Holly had set the template for most modern rock and roll bands: 2 guitars, 1 bass, and 1 drums, and there's no telling what new innovations Holly might have immortalized for ages to come. The death of Ritchie Valens was especially tragic for the Latin community, as he was the first Latin rock star. He was just 17 years old when he died, far from the prime of his life. Had he not died, the Latin community would have had a far stronger advocate in the music industry, and the face of modern rock and roll might look a lot different than it does today. J.P. Richardson Jr. had blazed brand new trails by combining R&B, rock and roll, and country seamlessly together on the same record. He also was responsible for creating the first music video, and had he not died, there's no telling what further musical fusions may have resulted. Our next last-minute change doomed history's most infamous ship to its watery grave. Last-minute officer change sinks the Titanic. This is the key that sunk the Titanic. The key belonged to Second Officer David Blair, who was removed from the Titanic crew at the last minute. With the Titanic's sister ship, the RMS Olympic, experiencing layovers, White Star Line decided that the Olympic's chief officer would take Blair's position for the voyage. In the haste of the crew changeover, Blair forgot to pass the key to the binoculars in the crow's nest along, although other versions of the story state that the binoculars were actually left inside Blair's locked room. Without binoculars, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee were forced to rely on their unaided vision in the pitch black to try and spot oncoming icebergs. At an inquiry into the sinking, both lookouts were asked if having a pair of binoculars available would have allowed them to see the iceberg from further away. Fleet remarked that with the binoculars, he would have likely been able to warn the ship fast enough for it to get out of the way. Up next, cloud cover and a navigator's decision ends up saving tens of thousands of Japanese lives. Cloudy weather saves thousands of lives from atomic hellfire. August 9, 1945. 3 days earlier, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, unleashing untold devastation. Warned of further atomic attacks, Japan still refused to surrender. Now, a nuclear-laden B-29 bomber crosses the skies over Japan unescorted. The Japanese Air Force has been so thoroughly decimated that no fighters rise up to meet it. Early in the morning, the B-29 had been forced to abandon its original target of Kokura, a heavily industrialized city on the northern tip of Kyushu Island. The city is a hub of military production, but that morning heavy cloud cover had obscured the target. The city's plants had been ordered the day before to burn coal tar in order to produce heavy clouds of dark smoke, but the weather had also conspired to save the Japanese city. With no clear line of sight to the target, the bomber heads to its secondary target, Nagasaki. Nagasaki is also an important trade and manufacturing city for the Japanese, but less important for the war effort than Kokura. Nevertheless, a few hours later, the B-29 arrives on station over Nagasaki. The plan is simple: deliver the bomb at the city's densely populated center. But there's a problem. Heavy clouds have obscured the city below from sight. Flying a holding pattern, the bomber finally spots a patch of clear sky and heads for it. 2 miles from the city center, the second nuclear attack in world history is launched. The bomb detonates far from the densely industrialized and populated target, but the devastation is still immense. Tens of thousands die instantly, tens of thousands more will quickly follow. However, the last-minute decision to change target sites means the bomb inflicted less casualties than predicted, saving untold thousands from incineration. Our next last-minute decision reshaped human history. June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, is on a public tour through Sarajevo. He's been warned that the Serbian nationals had hatched a plot to kill him, but in an act of unmitigated hubris decides to go through with the trip anyway. If that wasn't bad enough, his motorcade's route has been printed on every public newspaper. Unsurprisingly, Serbian terrorists hatch a plan to kill him. As the Archduke's car takes a turn, Gavrilo Princip and compatriots throw a satchel bomb under the Duke's car. The bomb, however, fails to go off immediately, and the delayed blast ends up missing the Duke entirely. Instead, it seriously wounds some of the Duke's entourage, who were rushed to the nearest hospital. The Duke demanded that he be taken to see the wounded men, but the motorcade's driver spoke Czech and did not understand the planned change. Thus, they kept driving the original route. Angered, the Duke demands his Czech driver to reroute, but by then the car had retraced its steps and straight past the flabbergasted Princeps, who couldn't believe his luck. As the Duke demanded the car stop, Princeps made his move and fired twice, killing the Duke and launching Europe into a global war. How would history have been different if the Duke hadn't demanded his car to stop and turn around? Well, for starters, there wouldn't have been a Nazi party and a Second World War with Germany as the aggressor. There would also have been no Holocaust and no Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. The repercussions from this point on are simply too great to predict, but the face of the planet would have looked a lot different if the Duke had allowed his driver to just continue on the planned route, or if someone had thought to hire drivers that spoke more than just Czech. Our next last-minute decision toppled a superpower. One lazy official brings down the Soviet Union. In the last half of 1989, East Germans had taken to launching massive protests, demanding the types of reforms sweeping across the Soviet Union in their own nation. East Germany's Soviet-backed rulers, though, weren't ready to give up control, and thus, in a bid to placate the masses, drew up plans for new travel regulations. The new travel regulations appeared to allow free travel out of East Germany for its people, but in reality still held the same national security regulations that kept East Germans prisoners in their own country for decades. On the night of November 9th, Günter Schabowski, spokesman for the East German Politburo, was scheduled to hold a press conference over the proposed travel regulations. Shortly before his conference, he received a memo from the Politburo with updates on the proposed travel regulations and minutes from the meeting, which included some proposed but not accepted ideas for opening the borders. Schabowski quickly scanned the document and then discarded it as he entered the press conference. His decision to not read the document thoroughly doomed the Soviet bloc to disintegration. Speaking on the proposed regulations for an hour, finally an Italian journalist asked about travel regulations. Hastily attempting to remember what he'd read about foreign travel, Schabowski began to mumble, letting out half answers that included exit via border crossings and a mumbled possible for every citizen. Immediately, the room exploded into a frenzy of activity as reporters hurled question after question at Schabowski, demanding to know when the regulations would go into effect. Completely rattled, Schabowski picked through his papers before muttering, "Immediately, right away." The rest is history. Reporters immediately left to wire off the hot news, and by 10:42 p.m. that night, West German television had announced that the border was open for everyone. 5 hours after Schabowski's press conference, crowds began to form up at border crossing points. At first a few dozen, but soon it was thousands, and the border guards, with orders from the Soviet Union to allow nobody to cross, were forced to allow the East Germans to cross as they willed. The opening of the borders and the fall of the Berlin Wall cost the Soviet Union one of the biggest bargaining chips against NATO and resulted in sweeping revolution across the Soviet bloc. Eventually, the Soviet Union would cave to internal and external pressure and dissolve, its days as a superpower over. Had Schabowski taken a moment to properly read his notes, Europe could very well still be divided between East and West, and a confrontation between two nuclear superpowers still possible at any moment. Up next, the decision to not interrupt a nap cost Germany World War II. Hitler naps and loses the Second World War. In 1944, Germany had seized nearly all of Europe. The Allies no longer had a hold on the continent, and if the Third Reich was to be defeated, they would have to kick in the door to Fortress Europe with the largest amphibious operation in human history. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was placed in charge of the coastal defenses in Western Europe and was appalled at how bad they were. He immediately launched a program of fortification that stretched from the Bay of Biscay all the way to Norway. He also pushed for a redeployment of the panzer divisions afforded to the defense forces. Rommel wished to hold the panzers close to the beach, knowing that Allied air power would make massing tanks for a counterattack impossible once the Allies secured a beachhead. Other German generals, however, felt that the panzers were better placed outside of potential invasion areas, where they could mass together for an overwhelming counterattack. Only Rommel appreciated that Allied air power was far superior to German at this point in the war. In the end, Hitler decided to hold the panzers back in a reserve force under his explicit command. When the Allies landed, all of German leadership was sure it was merely a diversionary attack meant to take German attention from the true landing site at Pas-de-Calais. Within hours, however, it was becoming clear to commanders on the ground that they were facing a significant Allied invasion. Even if it was diversionary, German forces were finding it impossible to hold off the invading force. Field commanders immediately began calling for panzer support, but under strict orders to not move without Hitler's direct approval, the panzer forces remained in place miles behind the beachheads. And back in Germany, Hitler's aides decided not to wake the Führer from his slumber to inform him of the invasion. Granted, nearly all the German leadership was still under the impression that the attack in Normandy was a distraction, even days after the successful landings. But if Hitler had been awakened, the panzer forces could have been rallied quickly enough to meet the Allies on the beaches. In that case, D-Day would have almost certainly failed, and an even bloodier future invasion against a better prepared Germany would have resulted. In the end, the Allies may have never cracked Fortress Europe, and the Soviet Union may have been overcome by overwhelming German firepower. Next, a single unread note leads to the birth of the United States of America. Unread note costs Britain the Revolutionary War. In December of 1776, things were looking bleak for the American Continental Army. The upstart rebels had suffered a string of crushing defeats at the hand of the British and their Hessian mercenaries, losing New York City and granting the British a beachhead in the colonies. General George Washington's army, numbering around 6,000 strong, was low on morale, supplies, and on the verge of spiritual defeat. One more defeat could crush the Americans' will to continue fighting. With public support rapidly turning against the rebels, Washington knew he needed a decisive victory to prove the colonies had a chance at freedom, and he would achieve it with a gutsy attack on a heavily fortified target and the help of an unread note. Washington's plan was to invade Trenton and destroy the Hessian garrison there. However, the garrison was held by 1,600 battle-hardened and well-equipped Hessian mercenaries, and led by experienced German Colonel Johann Rall. Rall had fought in Russia, Bavaria, the Netherlands, Scotland, and the French and Indian War. He was a tough strategic thinker hardened by decades of war, but he made the fatal mistake of misjudging the sheer guts of his enemy. On the night of December 26th, Washington prepared his attack on Trenton. His plan was simple, but frankly somewhat insane. He would ferry thousands of troops on any boat they could get their hands on across the nearly frozen Delaware River in the middle of a blizzard. Then he would move on to Trenton under cover of night and the bad weather surrounding the town. But a spy in Washington's midst got news to a loyalist farmer who dispatched his son to rush to Trenton and warned Rall of the impending attack. Arriving at the wealthy merchant's home Rall had made his headquarters, the messenger rushed to give Rall the note. However, Rall and his men were celebrating Christmas, believing that the Continental Army was all but broken after a string of humiliating defeats. He also believed that the bad weather and freezing conditions would make crossing the Delaware impossible. Thus, most of his men were celebrating and drinking heavily and unprepared for an invasion. Rall took the note and, despite insistence of its importance, stuffed it into a pocket and promptly forgot about it as he was challenged to a chess game. The unread note, which outlined Washington's plan, was rumored to still be in his pocket when he died of his injuries the next morning. Washington took Trenton and defeated the Hessian forces there, suffering only light casualties and securing badly needed equipment for the rebel army. News of his victory spread like wildfire and the flames of revolution rekindled. America had hope of victory after all, and thousands rallied to Washington's banner to throw off the yoke of British oppression. Had Rall read the note, his forces would have inflicted a catastrophic defeat on Washington, potentially killing him, James Madison, James Monroe, John Marshall, Aaron Burr, or Alexander Hamilton, all men who would go on to champion the fight for freedom and shape the nation to come. Rall's decision to ignore the note warning of attack cost Britain the Revolutionary War and guaranteed the rise of America as a global superpower. Now go check out Most Expensive Mistakes in History, or click this other video instead.